Hello and a warm welcome to this presentation. It's all about how the human firewall is the most important component when it comes to cybersecurity. Yes, and you can see it right here. The human is the most important piece of the puzzle, so to speak, because otherwise no antivirus and no secure browser will help you at all. And that's what this presentation is about, how you, so to speak, can build a secure firewall in your company, in your business, completely without Windows Defender or additional tools. Of course, you can use them and they are definitely useful, but the most important link here is, without a doubt, the employee. So now we have the first slide here, so to speak. And this is simply about the fact that hackers, or generally, yes, people with malicious intent, exploit this human vulnerability. Cybercriminals, exactly. And they know full well that most people just don't have this awareness, this security awareness. That many are curious by nature and will click on any link, or that they can also work with pressure and insecurity and with fear, of course, in part. And in that case, even the best technology is of no use, whether it's Microsoft Defender or another antivirus. If your employees are randomly clicking on every link and sharing everything, or yes, are perhaps also too trusting, maybe even smuggle something in themselves. That exists now too. It's rarer, but I don't want to rule out that something like that exists. And for that, you must, of course, train all employees accordingly and prepare them so that they really know what they can click on and open. And I find the image of the fortress very fitting because it shows, on the one hand, that a company can really become a fortress and build up security. But on the other hand, you know the story of Odysseus, where this Trojan horse gets through the thickest walls of Troy and, yes, was secretly smuggled in, so to speak. And that happens in the best companies, in the largest and medium-sized ones, but also in small companies. And the wall can be as thick and as large as you want, and the gate can be as strong as you want. Under the pretext of, we want to give you a gift, we have an offer for you. It usually sounds tempting, and you let it in, you open the gate, in this case, yes, the firewall, and open, so to speak, the entry to the Windows computer. And then the whole thing is already inside. And that's why I find this image quite fitting. Yes, but how does this whole thing happen? I've already touched on it. The most important thing is that most attackers work with fear and with ignorance. That is, they say, okay, we'll build up pressure, we'll create fear, we'll say you have to update this password now, you have to pay this bill now. And they often pose as employees or as the boss. Yes, and people believe them because of voice cloning. But it doesn't even have to be voice cloning. It could be a phone call or a convincing email, something like that, that simply builds trust. It's trust inspiring, and they build authority. They pretend to be someone they're not. And sometimes it works. Not always, but in most cases it apparently does. And the employees then pay the invoice or open the email attachment, whatever. And just like that, you've, so to speak, downloaded the damage onto your computer. And of course, it's also true that many employees are naturally curious and like to open things, like to look at a preview. Although a preview would be good, of course. They open the link, and then unknowingly, they also open application documents that aren't real. And then in the worst case, the ransomware, a Trojan, whatever, unpacks itself. And it's almost always an attachment infected with malware. So phishing emails are something else. In that case, the employee has to click to update data, passwords, or credit cards, or whatever. And that's different from ransomware, which is really worse and can paralyze the entire company. Yes, and then of course we have the most common employee mistakes, and that's simply what I just mentioned. They just click on these emails relatively quickly, sometimes without even thinking. And what happens then primarily, I just mentioned it, this Trojan is unpacked, the malware is unpacked in the background, and you often don't notice until weeks or at least days later that you're infected. It can be a worm, a virus, ransomware, a Trojan, anything is possible. With a phishing email, it's relatively fast because they give away their data relatively quickly and share it with others. In this case, with the hackers. And with ransomware, you actually have to pay the ransom. If you don't, you won't get your data back. But I think it's good that fewer and fewer companies are paying this money because they don't get the data back anyway. Yes, shocking, but unfortunately true. Over 73% use weak passwords and even reuse passwords, and I don't want to exclude myself from that. just using the same password for an online forum over and over because it's easy to remember. But I actually have a pretty good strategy that is still secure. And from time to time, also update the passwords and use a secure password manager and use a very, very secure master password, preferably from a very long sentence or with many special characters and upper and lower case letters. In any case, not something like my house, 12345, my rose, or my darling, my love, and our company last summer, or whatever. These are the common passwords, and hackers search for these passwords. There's this classic dictionary method they use to then, yes, hack people. And alarmingly, this doesn't just happen in the private sphere, but also in companies where there are simply default passwords that can be cracked within a few hours, days. It can crack weeks, and there are very difficult passwords that can only be cracked in a few billion years, and nobody lives that long. Yes, and many of them also share sensitive data, I'd say. Clicking on links with passwords might also reveal credit card information, data prices, and so on, so you should be careful about what you share with others. But the important thing here is that you develop a really good password strategy. You can use a password manager, that their passwords are not vulnerable or sensitive, that their passwords are strong, that their master passwords are strong, that they use a separate password for each login, a very strong password, and that they also use a really good password manager, and of course also impress upon their employees that it should be a strong password and not something with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and any other passwords that are relatively easy to hack. We also have the topic of employees here again. This is happening far too often now, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be malicious intent behind it, someone plugging in a USB stick to check something and thereby infecting the laptop. It's also about employees sharing too much on social media, being too open, and even sharing private photos or other things at work. And of course, there's what I mentioned before. Employees are generally too curious, too open, leaving sensitive data lying around, perhaps clicking on email attachments too quickly, and all those things where, as a boss or chairman, you really have to be on top of things and say, please make sure you don't do that, and so on. This again relates to the topic of cybersecurity training, where employees need to be informed accordingly. Yes, so here we have how to build a very strong human firewall. These are several building blocks. I am talking about a cycle here, and it naturally begins with the human being, quite clearly, definitely with the employee, but it also begins with virus protection. If that includes fields and external virus protection, a secure password, a secure master password, two-factor authentication, and a secure browser that you should use, current updates, backups, and all those things that fall under that umbrella. And then, of course, there's the issue of communication, a healthy company structure where people communicate with each other, exchange ideas, and form a security team, so to speak. And of course, they also help each other and take advantage of external security training courses. And it would be the area of awareness, that is the understanding that one educates oneself further and develops this awareness of how the whole thing works so that a company remains secure. And of course, that one also knows how hackers actually work, how they even get into the system so that one can counteract it accordingly. And this cycle here is actually like this, it repeats itself. This pattern repeats itself, of course, when they are attacked or potentially becoming a target for attack, I would say, means that if a component doesn't work perfectly, then there can be weaknesses and security gaps. Yes, then we have security and everyone's exactly. Security is, so to speak, everyone's responsibility, everyone's individual responsibility. You can see several employees here now, which is quite good. They all have a sign in their hand, and it's not just up to the CEO or the chairman, and it's not just up to one employee either, but really about seeing each other as a team, but also, as I just mentioned, about attending or taking advantage of training and then training a good IT team accordingly. That's actually the most important thing to do in order to install this firewall, this human firewall, so to speak. Even the best virus protection won't help otherwise. And every single employee can contribute to the company's security using different strategies. So this doesn't necessarily have to be subject to a fee. It can simply start with informing yourself, reading a blog, gathering that kind of information. Of course, he also educates himself further on YouTube and learns all those stories. And of course, each individual employee can then contribute accordingly and, so to speak, eliminate the weaknesses. yes, the role in the organization. So this now concerns the role in cybersecurity, which are the individual steps of the pyramid. I'm currently wondering which way to go, from top to bottom or from top to bottom. I'm guessing it starts at the bottom. I'm not sure, but normally you go from the bottom up when looking at a pyramid. So it's definitely true. But it looks a little different there. So staying informed is definitely always a good thing to continue your education and stay informed. I just mentioned that, yes, and that these good things are then put into practice, i.e. put into action. That all of this is also put into practice. Everything I just mentioned, secure passwords, two-factor authentication, a secure browser, good virus protection, coordination within the company, building a security team, forming an IT team, but also staying regularly up to date through blog articles and trade fairs. There are several ways you can stay up to date. And of course, then also the topic of reporting. This probably also concerns the security report within the company. Yes, that from time to time you also check how secure the company is. Here too, you can get help from the outside, so to speak. Or you can look for yourself to see where our weaknesses still are, what we can improve. And that's also a bit of point 5, that you build this, yes, security culture and really look at what is already good in the company, what is already working well, and where can we improve ourselves. And I think this doesn't just apply to companies. There was a very good documentary about a school. As I said, it stated that our Wi-Fi can't be cracked that easily. They lost the bet, I believe, against an IT team. So it wasn't a super expert team. It was a very simple documentary, but they lost this bet because there were, in fact, vulnerabilities. And these vulnerabilities at the school were, for example, that this Wi-Fi password was hanging on the public bulletin board, among other things, so that it could be read out relatively easily, things like that. And in a company, it's exactly the same or similar. Exactly. That you look here, okay, what kind of Wi-Fi password do we have? Where is it posted? Who has access to it? Who generally has access to all these services, to the cloud? And what should employees have access to? And what must they have access to and what not? You simply have to define all of that. From Microsoft Cloud, or this could just be an example, from Windows Defender and countless other programs and tools where you have to determine which employee has access to it and what rights they have. It's the same with WordPress. Do you give them the admin rights, then they can take down the entire website, or do you give them the role of an author and editor, then they can only write and edit the blog articles? Just as a comparison. Oh, that was already the end, okay. I thought there was more to come. Exactly. These are the next steps that you can practically implement. I've already mentioned it. To implement this in your company, that is, put it into practice. And yes, this technology behind it is actually relatively simple because the technology behind it is called people and employees. This doesn't mean that you have to use Norton or Kaspersky or something. That is a well-intentioned recommendation, so to speak, but it's not a must. Microsoft Defender is sometimes sufficient. It depends, of course, on the company's size and the company's goals. Yes, and the most important thing is really that the employees are trained, that they build this human firewall, which then integrates and works together with the Windows Defender and the firewall and can thus become a really strong protective shield. Yes, thank you for your attention and see you at the next presentation.